Hey everyone, Anthony here. This is it. We have the thrilling sequel to last week's conversation. Not only is this week's guest a colorectal surgeon, but he's also the husband of last week's guest. It's really, really fun to do this, to hear both perspectives on the way that they manage their household and the way that they each balance work and family life. I've been assured that I am in no way responsible for any conflict that arises, so I think we're in the clear. He also gives some free medical advice, so bonus. Anyway, I appreciate you listening. If you would please click the follow button, leave me a rating. That would really mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. My guest today, he is a surgeon at Lahey Hospital. He is a father of two, and he's also the husband of last week's guest, Sarah Berkeley. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jonathan Abelson. Dr. Jonathan, welcome.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
Yeah, my pleasure. So usually we just start off with a quick background on your career. So if you'd share a little bit about that, please.
Sure. Well, I'll just start off by saying that I'm thrilled to be able to provide my rebuttal to my wife's podcast that just
Yeah.
So I'm a colorectal surgeon. I work at Lahey Hospital and Medical Center in Burlington, Massachusetts. I did undergrad was at University of Pennsylvania. I actually took 2 years off between undergrad and medical school. I was not 100% certain that going to medical school would be the right thing for me. I actually did some healthcare consulting in Manhattan for a couple of years and then decided that, yes, I wanted to go to medical school. I spent 4 years in Charlottesville, Virginia, at medical school at University of Virginia. I became quite attracted to the surgical specialty and opted to pursue a general surgery residency at Weill Cornell Medicine, which is part of New York Presbyterian Hospital on the Upper East Side in New York City, which is where I met the one and only Sarah Berkeley.
Yeah.
I did then a year of colorectal surgery fellowship at Washington University in St. Louis, which is where one of our young boys was born. And I'm currently in year 4 of practice as an attending surgeon at Lahey Hospital.
Wow. Well, you are our first surgeon on the show, so it's pretty exciting as well.
Nice.
I know we appreciate everything you're doing out there. So we know from last week that you're a father of two.
Yep.
It's the same 2 kids that we spoke about last week, for sure.
Yep.
And I'm not going to be responsible for any sort of conflict between you and Sarah, right? I'm a neutral third party here, so I don't want to be,
Sure. We won't drag you into the fray. Don't.
Okay.
That'll stay between us.
Great. So, well, I, before we get into it, I wanted to ask: do you feel like your background as a surgeon and in medicine informs the way that you're a parent at all?
I think that it is. I mean, I think just one sort of generic comment that we can get into more detail of, but I think, certainly one thing that attracted me to the field of surgery and colorectal surgery is that I like taking action. I mean, I like doing things and then seeing a result and seeing a fix. And so I didn't love in medical school sitting around a table for 3-4 hours and talking about patients, and not to take anything away from primary care physicians or cardiologists. Obviously what they do is fantastic, but I wanted to be in the OR and, cut someone open, make them better, go home. And so in some ways that is a little bit of my parenting style, not cutting open my children, but just sort of more like more directed experience and response rather than just sort of sitting down on the floor and playing a game that's open-ended. That's a little bit more challenging for me. It's a little bit more like, let's go outside and plant these 10 garlic bulbs. Let's go for a walk around the neighborhood. So a little bit more like an action that I then do with my kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what about on the reverse side? Do you feel like you approached your career as a surgeon any differently after becoming a father?
I think it's definitely something that I think about whenever I'm seeing patients in the clinic. And, I sort of sometimes you try not to do this, and other times I think it is good to do it, where I sort of imagine, what if this were my son? Or what if this were my wife? and
Yeah.
and how would that impact how I then communicate with the patient or their family? I mean, I feel like I try to do a good job of reaching out to the patient's family or support network, because I can only imagine the times where I've been in those shoes on the other end of the table, and you're sort of like, I kind of wish I had a little bit more information. I kind of wish this doc like engaged us a little bit more and told us what's going on.
Yeah. How accurate is the show Scrubs to the real medical world?
I would say I have no idea because I don't watch it.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
should. It's a great show.
yeah. Never really got into Scrubs, Grey's Anatomy. Just never really got into those shows. I feel like maybe it was a little too close to home, and I was like just living it every day. I was like, I can't watch this at home.
That's fair. Okay, so being a surgeon sounds pretty hard. I work in sales. I work from home. It's has its ups and downs, but I also am around a lot, and I can imagine that being a surgeon is pretty stressful and also very like you're tethered to where you have to be, which was a bit of the conversation I had with Sarah last week as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your take on just the rigor of your job and how you've been able to try to find some balance with that as you became a father and just what that's been like.
Yeah, and so I try not to, I really try not to take anything away from other specialties or other career types. I think each job certainly has its own stressors. It is hard for me not to think about how there are some unique challenges to my individual career and how that is different and perhaps in some ways more challenging than other careers. And so yeah, work's stressful. It's exhausting. I mean, I'm all day for the most part interacting with people, talking, thinking as much as possible at I would like to think a quite a high level in critical thinking. And so, I get home at, if I'm lucky, 5 o'clock or 5:30, and if I'm unlucky, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and just like spent. And it's sort of like the second that I walk in the door, well, maybe not the second I walk in the door, but once there's a little bit of downtime, then you just crash because it's just like go, 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 when I'm at work. And so,
Mhm.
um, try to not let that crash happen before the kids go to sleep so I can still be upbeat for them. And I think I do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember Sarah mentioning that you do a really good job of when you come home, you kind of give her a chance to have a break and relieve her from watching the kids for a bit. But we're actually having something similar where my wife is a principal of a high school, so she's not a surgeon, but she's also somewhere all day that she has to be at, and so she just returned to work and I'm home. I'm on parental leave right now, and I have noticed like, okay, when she comes home, I'm looking forward to handing off this little gal. But also, I feel like she's probably pretty stressed from what she did all day as well, right? So maybe she probably isn't pumped to then be on baby duty as soon as she gets home. So I imagine you have that experience as well sometimes.
Yeah, yes, although I think having that different part of your brain, having that different part of your life then be engaged is still refreshing. And so, last night I got home and it was like, I've started to, and one of the things maybe we'll talk about how to sort of like try to incorporate the two or some self care. I've started to try as much as possible to, when I get home, then take both kids and the dog out for a long walk around the neighborhood. And so it's like, that to me is a bit rejuvenating because I'm like turning my mind off with respect to medicine and surgery. I'm not like counseling patients on how they may now have metastatic disease and like there's no additional surgical cure, which is terrible, or dealing with a surgical complication, which is terrible. And I can just sort of like talk to my son about like, how's your day at school? And so that to me is actually quite refreshing and rejuvenating, as opposed to just like maybe sitting on the couch and like not moving. And that's just a little bit of how I am and how I'm built. I can certainly see how you want to come home and just veg on the couch, and don't get me wrong. As soon as I go to sleep, that's what I'm doing. But at
Yeah.
least for those like 2 hours that I'm home, I do find that quite enjoyable.
So you don't get to work from home very much. Certainly not on surgery days.
Nope. Maybe one day. Maybe one day.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah, we can figure that out one day. So one of the things that we were talking about last week was the parent that works from home usually becomes more of like the default person to handle things if, if the kids are sick and they have to stay home, or just they're just around when things come up. And the parent that has to be at the office or in the OR, it just has a hard time doing that. Have you found, well, do you agree with that? How do you feel about that? And like, what do you do things to try to like compensate for that?
Yeah. So I actually asked Sarah, is that something that she's heard before? Is that because I don't know that I've heard this phrase of default parent before. Um, so yeah, I mean that is a source of friction between us. There's no question that that's, and so I promise again we won't pull you into that, but like that, yeah, like that is a bit the way our relationship works, and so that does mean that she ends up needing to, do more of the things and then interrupt her life, which is like that gets really frustrating and old. And so there can be times where it's like, you know, I'm doing this, and this, and like, this is bothersome to me, or I can tell that she's frustrated. And it hasn't happened as much recently because I feel like we've had a number of like good conversations about it. Because I sort of am just like, what do you what do you want me to do? What do you, like? I'm going to cancel a surgery. I'm going to cancel a clinic patient. Like I can do that. There's no like I'm not saying that I can't do that, but that's kind of a big deal. And like, yeah, if there's a medical emergency or a life emergency, I will do that. It's not like I'm going to choose my patients over like my family's like emergency health situation. But if it's not truly an emergency and there's a way around it, which yes means the default parent is the default and needs to change their life, then that's unfortunately what that means. I think one of the ways that we've worked around it is I've been able to, and we've been able to work out other ways that I can then become the default parent for said activity. And that's something that I know, she was referring to. And so, and we're looking for new ways. And so, for example, in the last few weeks, we have expanded the time that we're able to drop off our son at preschool. And so now rather than dropping him off at 9 a.m., we can now drop him off at 8 a.m. And so, like, that is much more feasible for me on certain days to go in an hour later and drop him off at school rather than like 2 or 3 hours later. And so like this morning, I was able to do that, which was awesome.
Do you think that parents should strive to split the share of responsibilities as evenly as possible?
And so I will agree with my wife that I think that if we are in like a perfect union, then that is very reasonable. But I would just say like that's just not going to be possible almost no matter what, no matter who the couple is. So to me, no, that shouldn't be the aim, because I think if Sarah and I try to do that, it would just be conflict after conflict, because it is not compatible with at least my career and profession. It's just not. And
Yeah.
so maybe there's another partnership where yes, that is more feasible. Maybe both parents are working from home and they have equal sort of aspirations for their career, but there's so many other factors in there. So I don't really think that that should be the goal 50-50.
Sure. And I think also responsibilities have different weighting to different people, right? So that you might do things that you think are a bigger deal to do, or and they might be like come easier to her, and vice versa. So it is hard to find that like perfect harmonious split. Now, in Sarah's defense, she did say, you chip in as much as you can. You do things like to show her that you care about her, and you're doing your best. But it just sounds like there's just no choice but for her to have more things to do during the day.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And like we've said, like she said, like I'm saying, I think there have been good ways where I've been able to chip in and then say that that's something that I'm going to take ownership of. And there still are times where I'll forget or I'm not able to, and then it's like, okay, well now I'm going to do it. And I'll just say, and this is something that she didn't say, which is that there are some times where she'll then ask me to do something and I'll do it, but then it's not good enough. Or she's like, I would do it differently. And so we
Yeah,
then had a conversation about that. And it's like, if you're going to ask me to be the parent and like take care of this, let me take care of it.
yeah.
You know,
Well, I don't think that one's unique to the two of you. I'm pretty sure. Um,
agreed.
just like kind of zooming out for a second, talk me through just like what does a typical week look like as far as like how long is the typical day? How much of the day are you at the hospital? Like, is it different every week, the Monday to Friday?
Yeah, so I have, and I'm like actually looking at my OR schedule here, and as Sarah alluded to, it is, some days it's a Monday, some days it's a Wednesday, some days it's a Thursday, some days it's a Friday.
Yeah.
I'll just say broadly speaking, on OR days, OR starts at 7:30. I have to see the patient in pre-op by 7 a.m. I usually see them by about 6:45, so that means I'm leaving my house at 6:25, 6:30. Recently, our son has been waking up earlier, which has actually been I really enjoy because I actually get to see him in the morning, and we take the dog for a walk at 6 o'clock in the morning when it's dark out, which has actually been a lot of fun. But I'm usually out of the house by like 6:30 for an OR day. And then in OR day, that's one of those question marks. Don't know when I'm going to be home. And there are some OR days that I have where I'm like nearly positive I know when I'm going to finish and then I'll be home by 5:30 or so. And then there's other days where I'm like, this case like could take me 8 hours. Maybe it's only supposed to take 4 hours, but it takes me longer for a variety of reasons. And I don't know. A clinic day usually starts at 8 a.m. And last clinic patient 3:45, 4 o'clock, but then it's finishing notes. And so yesterday I wasn't able to finish all of my notes, but opted to go home instead and then finish them once the kids are asleep. Pluses and minuses to doing it that way. I do colonoscopies, and so for colonoscopy days, that usually starts at 8 a.m. and last scope is usually around 3 p.m. And so usually, I know I'm able to like leave by about 5 or so.
I see. One of the few I'm a big supporter of working from home. One of the few downsides is that it can like lead to like a blending of like work and job and family, because you're just like you're kind of always there. You're doing work kind of where you live, and so there's that blend. My wife always talks about how she likes to have like a separate workspace and do things differently. And I'll like work on the couch like where I do other things. Um, but in the medical profession as a surgeon, I imagine it's still tough to not bring things home with you. Maybe not literally, but just again, I've seen scrubs. Like it's a tough day in the R sometimes, right? Like I'm sure that it's really hard. I'm sure that really must weigh on you. So how do you have any tips for not just if someone's a surgeon, but just how to like try to separate from work when you get home from work, and how not to take things home with you? Again, if it's not literal paperwork, just like the mental toll of the day.
Yeah. So, and maybe this will be an opportunity that I can also plug a separate podcast that I have been involved in. It's called Gut Check. It's a podcast through our official American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons, or colorectal surgery, ASCRS, and that's like our official like organization for colorectal surgery. And there's a group of 6 of us that record episodes. They come out every 2 weeks, and this is something we talk about. It's supposed to be about just like the life and practice of a colorectal surgeon, and not necessarily like this is how you do a hemorrhoidectomy. And so one of the things we talked about is like, yeah, how do you manage that at home? And I, one of the co-hosts on that show talks about how he doesn't separate it, and his kids are a little bit older, and so like he talks to his family and his kids about like, I had an anastomotic leak, I had a a ureter injury, I had a patient had a heart attack, like, and share it, because it is all, how can you separate the two? I'll just say, I grew up in a family, my family are all dentists. I grew up in a family of dentists. And so, like, I distinctly remember basically every like dinner conversation at one point or another ended up being talking about, the dental practice in the office or certain patients. And like, and I really feel like that informed my decision to end up, going into healthcare and becoming a physician. So I don't do that myself right now. Kids are too young to be able to appreciate that. Sarah's sort of in healthcare, but not really medicine, and so she doesn't really understand the like day to day and the details. And so I don't do that. And maybe when they're older, I will. And so what do I do? It's like, let me do something physical, right? So I like, we're both quite active. We like to think active, healthy people, and so like to get my mind off of something at work, it'll be, okay, let's go in the backyard. Let's rake up leaves. Let's go for a walk around the neighborhood. Let's try and be physical. So I'm engaging a different part of my mind, to take my mind off of it. But there's definitely been times where I'm like way less jovial, and upbeat, because there's something terrible that's happened at work, and I like, can't sleep, can't eat, and feel like doo doo. And so like, what are you going to do? We're all human.
Yeah. Do you think about how your kids see the way you approach your career? And so the two of you have different careers, right? As far, just from like a where you are standpoint alone, but then also just like the demands of it and whatnot. So are you thinking about that as they get?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to go into healthcare and medicine and surgery is the idea that you're, it's a bit selfish, or it's a bit like I want to do something for society, as if like my impact can actually do something. But I find value in that, and I feel like it's meaningful, and that is something that I want to pass on to my kids. Is that I feel like I'm not just like making money. And it's actually funny because maybe a year or so ago, when we were talking to our son about like what do we do for work, and I don't remember how this ended up happening, but for a period of time, we were talking about how you make money at work. And so when I would ask, my son, like, oh, what does daddy do for work? Oh, he makes money. And it wasn't like, oh, he takes care of patients. And I was like, that's not, and so we've redirected and now it's like, oh, it takes care of patients and help patients. And so that's definitely something that, I want them to grow up with and hear about and know about. Not to say that I want them to become physicians or go into healthcare, but I want them to, know that I think it's important to find value in your work and that you're, helping people.
Knowing everything that you know now about med school and an internship and residency and being a surgeon, would you encourage your kids to also become surgeons if that's what something that they're interested in, or would you maybe say, it's it's not for everybody?
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. I would take the same approach that my parents took, which is that they certainly weren't pressuring me at all to go and be a dentist. They were not pressuring me to go and be a physician or be a surgeon. It was just like, find what you're interested in and, and go for it. I, for sure, had people in my parents' generation who did do their best to talk me out of going to medical school and going and talk me out of being a doctor and a surgeon. It was just part of my reason for taking a couple years between undergrad and medical school. I do believe now that I'm here that this all was the right decision, and that I'm find incredible job satisfaction in what I'm able to do. Although there are ups and downs, and the downs can be quite low depending on how patients do. So I think for me, I imagine just being open and honest with my kids about what medical school was like, what general surgery residency was like, what colorectal fellowship was like, what having hundreds and thousands of dollars of debt was like, what it's like to like, but then also like what it's like to then see a patient who's like, I just cured you of colon cancer. Like, and that, like that's pretty awesome. And that's like an amazing feeling. And so like, I'm going to share that with them also.
Yeah. Well, why colorectal of all the of all the surgeries and all the regions of the body you could operate on?
I know, and yeah, and it's the question I get not infrequently from patients: why would you want to do this? So I mentioned before about surgery and just like you can fix something, which is awesome, and we can't always fix things, as opposed to prescribing a pill that you take for 20 years to hopefully prevent a heart attack. And again, not taking anything away from people who do that, there is value in that. Colorectal surgery has an amazing blend of disease processes, patient types, and surgeries that we do. So there are big open surgeries, there's minimally invasive surgeries, you do laparoscopic, you do robotics, so new technology approaches. There's anal rectal surgeries, which is not always the sexy part of colorectal surgery, but there are also smaller cases, patients do well, lower complication risks, so there's just so much variety in there. There's clinic patients, there's patients I meet emergently, there's patients who I see for years and years. There's colonoscopies, so you just meet them, do a colonoscopy, move on. Just the variety in your day. There are some surgical specialties where you are actually doing the same procedure over and over and over and over, which I know some surgeons find incredible satisfaction with, to just become absolutely master of a particular procedure. I didn't want that. I wanted the variety. I wanted to treat cancer. I thought the idea that you could cut out a cancer and like provide a cure was pretty awesome. There's surgical oncology. There's other surgical specialties that deal with certain cancers. Colorectal cancer is one of the most common cancers in the country. It can kill you, but it can also be cured. And so it's sort of that like sweet spot. There are other cancers that are actually quite common, but rarely are fatal. There are other cancers that almost no matter what you do, it's going to kill you. And so I just sort of like found that colorectal cancer is that sweet spot.
Interesting. Okay, so is there anything else that you want the listeners to know after they heard Sarah's episode last week? Is there anything else that you want to say?
I'll just reassure the listeners that everything is still going quite well in our marriage. We actually listened to her episode on a drive down to New York City. So we listened to it together and paused and talked about a few things. So
Okay.
yeah, I guess maybe one thing, and I sort of alluded to it before, that I'm personally working on is the main thing that I struggle with is like, and one of the things I haven't said yet is I probably have like maybe 5 to 10 minutes a day of just like really just me time. It's like there's work, there's getting home, there's the kids, there's like time with Sarah, which is great. But like rarely where it's really just me. And that's like the 5, 10 minutes before I'm like actually trying to fall asleep. And so something I've been working on is to try to work out ways to blend activities. And so I used to be quite active. I used to play college soccer and used to be physically very fit. And so I'm looking for ways to like be physically fit with my kids. So I mentioned, taking them for a walk. Well, now I've started carrying them around on a camping bag. So, and then we live in an area that has very steep hills. And so now I'm like doing a hill workout with my kids. We have a bike seat. So I'll try and like take them on bike rides. So just trying to find ways to work out with them rather than waiting for that like precious 45-minute nap window when I can, bang out a workout.
Yeah. Any other tips for self care or just finding me time and just balancing the busy schedule of being a surgeon and being a father?
Yeah, something's got to give. I think a lot of thing that surgeons will say, sometimes our physicians will say, is there's your work time, there's your family time, there's your personal time, right? And so like when you go to medical school or you become a physician, like you try and do all three. It's never going to be 30-30 or a third. Something's got to give. And so for now, I've prioritized like sleep rather than my own personal time. So I'm like barely reading books anymore. Like I said, not working out as much as I would like to, but that's because I like actually need to get sleep, right? There are some doctors who don't need to get sleep, or some just people who don't need to get sleep. And so I'm prioritizing that. So I think you just prioritize what you need in order to survive and hopefully thrive on your day to day, knowing that it means that you might be, missing out on that other aspect of your life.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to move into the final segment called Dr. John's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few topics. You ready?
Sure. Yeah, hit
Okay.
me.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this one. What advice do you have for people to, take care of their preventative rectal health?
Yeah, yeah. The answer, and I talk about this with patients. The answer I give is a bit of a lame answer, which is that generally speaking, whatever is good for your body and your health is good for your colon. So, like smoking, obesity, alcohol, like these are all things that are generally speaking in excess not good for you, and they're also not good for your colon. So some of the same risk factors for colorectal cancer or diverticulitis are some of those same risk factors. So it's I've transitioned to a pescatarian diet just in the concept that minimizing red meat or meat in general is probably better for your colon. Typical recommendation 64 ounces of a non caffeinated beverage. We should be targeting about 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. That's incredibly difficult with the Western diet. And so oftentimes patients do need to take fiber supplementation. But have an appropriate weight and plenty of exercise.
Gotcha. That's free medical advice for all the listeners. What is the best advice you've ever received?
um, I think do what you enjoy and not just what's easy. And so for me, there definitely would have been a much easier route to take in terms of my career and profession. But those would not have been nearly as satisfying, I think, as what I'm doing now. And so even though that was for sure a much harder road, I do believe, at least as of now, that it's worth it. And maybe ask me again in 20 years if I think it was worth it.
Yeah. What advice would you give to your former self?
Yeah, it's a good one because I heard you ask Sarah this, and so I've been thinking about that myself. What would I tell myself? Um, I actually it's a little silly maybe, and it's not super insightful for like the general population. But I had it. So I played soccer in college and tried to transition after college to long distance running, and developed a few injuries as a result of that, and tried to just like push through it, just like I sort of did throughout my life. But because I was getting older, sustained some injuries that have sort of become like permanent lingering injuries. And so, like, you can maybe make it a little bit deeper than this, but just try to like think about the long game
Yeah,
rather than just like pushing it through and trying to finish that. So I did like a half marathon around Central Park and really messed up my legs, and it's basically never been the same. So a little bit more like, long term planning would be better than just thinking about things in the moment.
sure. No, I think don't push through injuries is a good. It's a
Yeah, don't push
good,
through injuries. Yeah.
good bit of advice. Um, what advice do you have for a parent who does not work from home at all and is struggling to just find the time to spend time with their family and work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's looking for ways that when you are home, that you can then do something with your family that you enjoy and is not like as much of a what you would think of maybe as a sacrifice or burden. And so try and really think about what those activities are and then engage your family in those so that they kind of meet you also where you are. I think it would be very, very difficult for me if when I got home from a long day that I then needed to do some of the things that I felt like were a big lift for me. And that's something I know, we talked a little bit about and Sarah talked about, like there's certain activities that are a lift for people and there's other activities that we actually really enjoy. And so I have been able to find the activities that I enjoy that I can then do with my family, so that we can all spend time together.
Got it. All right, last question. I have a 5 month old daughter. So, what advice do you have for me as a father of a 5 month old daughter?
So the advice that I've been giving to new parents, and I'm probably about 5 months too late to give this advice to you, and I don't want to promote any specific products, but I have been using an app called 1 Second a Day, where I basically put a picture or a small video in an app from every single day of their lives. And like now it's a 13, 15-minute video, and I'm going to continue to do that for both of them. And so, it's definitely a little bit of like planning and stuff, but like, you're waiting for a train, you're waiting for an elevator, like, okay, let me scroll through my photos and upload one picture. And then, 1 year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, you basically have a video of your kid's life, which so far has been kind of cool to watch.
That's cool. Let's go 1 minute a day or 1 second a day.
1 second a day.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's not, there is an app for that. I know that that's not like necessarily a unique thing for kids. I feel like I've seen those like YouTube videos or stuff of like second a day or something. But I think that's kind of fun.
that's cool. All right, Dr. Jonathan, this has been a really great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about you? Is there anything else you want to promote? I know you mentioned your podcast, which I'll link in the show notes, but is there anything else that you want to share as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter, or X or whatever it's called, at Jabelson, Abelson, Abelson, MD. I do have a LinkedIn page that I don't engage in quite as much that I probably should. Probably Twitter, at least from like a professional standpoint, is what I go to. I've deleted my Instagram and Facebook accounts. So, and then the Gut Check podcast, I would say.
Awesome. All right, I'll link to those as well. Dr. Jonathan Abelson, ladies and gentlemen,
Very
thank
much.
you.